I want to pivot slightly from the more negative topics that I've been discussing recently to something that I'm legitimately excited for, and I've been excited for a very long time, and that is solar energy maturing as a technology. And it's getting to a point where it's able to compete cost-wise with hydrocarbon-based fuels. And that's a very important point because generally, as economics work, a technology will just not be used and it's only experimental up until that point where it just barely crosses the threshold to being cost competitive with the other options. And the beautiful thing is, as soon as it does cross that threshold, it gets adopted very rapidly because now you can make money on the difference between those two just by adopting the newer technology. And then that increases the efficiencies and you get economies of scale. And that's why technologies have a tendency to scale exponentially, which is a beautiful thing, especially in the energy sector, because currently we are using hydrocarbon-based fuels, which they're great. They're incredibly easy to store and transport, and they're very energy dense. But the beautiful thing about solar is it's a technology-based energy rather than a resource-based energy. Because the thing about solar is once you build them, you build the solar panels and then you have the batteries to store that energy to level it out. Once you build those things, they have very few moving parts and they just produce energy. They're like a font of energy that doesn't require any external input. Unlike a hydrocarbon-based power plant, a coal power plant will always need more coal in it to produce that energy. You get X amount of energy per Y coal, but you have to keep putting more resources into the system. Whereas solar, as soon as it's built, you no longer have to put any more energy into that system. It is just creating energy, which means that it is a renewable resource, obviously, and that's, a lot of people are harping on that quite a bit because we need to transition to renewable things. But it also means that once we have solar capacity for our entire society, we don't have to keep paying the price of adding more resource into the system to feed that need, because we're effectively, we've made the investment to just constantly supply our energy needs. And that means energy, once solar is completely adopted, can become incredibly cheap because it's pretty much paid off and you only need to build more solar capacity if you're going to build more stuff, which obviously you want to do, but you don't have to keep adding resources into the system for all the stuff you've already built. You don't need to keep digging up coal and oil in order to sustain the civilization that you already have, which means that energy can become like incredibly cheap. And with incredibly cheap energy means that we can invest in much more energy intensive processes, such as vertical farms and things like that are very efficient, but use massive cost prohibiting amounts of energy. And so that would also, if energy became very cheap, would increase the adoption of electric vehicles, because if you have compelling electric vehicles and energy is almost free, then there's also no reason to go and dig up the energy from the ground in the form of these hydrocarbons. It just doesn't make sense. And so that's one of the beautiful things about solar is it's not only is it good for the environment, but it's also the fastest way for us to break free of this constant having to feed energy into the system, because once that infrastructure is built, it just produces value. It's literally they're machines that take something that was valueless, effectively the sun, in areas where you'd install solar panels. That's not creating any value for anyone. But then once they're built, they're able to absorb that energy, and then we can convert that energy to whatever we want. And ideally, we would probably distribute it so that we could have smaller distributions of solar panels and things like that in such a way that we don't have such a centralized power grid, which makes a much more robust system. And it's a better electrical grid in every single way. And that's one of the things that I think needs to be sold more often is we're not doing this because we necessarily want to save the world, but this is literally a better system that we should start implementing now because it's just better. It's the electrical grid 2.0. It's the new version of the iPhone. It's not this contentious global debate. It's just a better piece of technology, and that's how it needs to be sold. And unfortunately, it's kind of gotten trapped up in the ideology wars, which is a very unproductive place. But I'm very optimistic that economics will pull that out of the ideology wars, and it'll just start getting implemented very soon because prices coming down at alarming rates, which is an excellent sign.